First and foremost, the purpose of alt-Zog is to obstruct, confuse, and exploit the racial consciousness of white Americans and white Westerners more broadly. A close second to this aim is the diligent and willful privileging of Jewish, specifically Zionist, chauvinism within right-wing circles. Now, thanks to Nick and his particular superpowers, everyone has known all along, all of a sudden, that these were in fact Zionist forces, Zionist influencers. And now, here's why that's fine. That seems to be the repartee. Now we're on social media, and a lot of what gets elided when you follow these based and red-pilled counter-establishment officials, when you're made to feel important because, hey, this guy's got foundation in his name. When you're just kind of networked in to a group based on people you follow or your mutuals, you really have no idea how you encountered these ideas. This gives root to kind of sublimate the existence of Zionism, and that it's not something that's front and center. For those of you who are around in the Gamergate Trump 2015 escalator ride stretch, there was no apology for Zionism on whatever the proto-spawn of the dissident right was. That's when the kind of implied fame or success of being published in Breitbart, or people engaging in this, I think what we now see is a fantasy of infiltration. Hey, maybe it's not so bad. Yeah, but why? It's not so bad if we're in the Daily Caller. Like, look, if Milo is extending out a hand to kind of peddle the idea of the alt-right to the Breitbart audience, like, hey, this is a big improvement. Nothing came out of that. In fact, worse than nothing came out of that. You had figures who capitalized on, let's just say, the destruction of the alt-right, of course, by Charlottesville and the kind of morass that everything fell into with nihilism. And that was a pretty common black pill back then, right? Everything had fallen apart. The infighting was continuous. This infighting, I guess, is still continuous. I think we're starting to discover that we're not so in with each other, that we may have thought we were in with one another. And that was slowly picked and pulled apart. The fact is that as various tiny little satellite groups, the internet right, begin to share stories about certain figures, they all discovered that they'd been maneuvered on and stabbed in the back, and all in this kind of order. And that's the fact of alt-Zog, is that this is a recent discovery. Of course, with Elon in charge of Twitter, a lot of old accounts are being just let back on. This ancient evidence is being pointed to, like, hey, look, we knew all along that this guy was a Zionist, or, here it is. And that's even more disturbing. The mask of irony and the kind of jouissance, right? The thrill of transgression. And so it's strange to look back at, say, Bronze Age perverts, content that's now being peddled out to say, like, well, here's the proof, or we should have known it all along. No one noticed. It was never a topic. This very name, Joel Davis is credited with the term alt-Zog, that there has to be a name given to this phenomenon shows how novel its discovery is. And it's strange to talk about it like that because we're discovering something that was right under our noses the entire time. And it was antisocial behavior of a single group that precipitated the coming together of disparate groups, the old book club, America First among them, to discover that, in fact, we'd all had the same knife wounds. It's very forensic. Alt-Zog is this strange patchwork that's been around for a long time, but the consciousness that they may bear some kind of status quo subservience and masking that in the thrill of transgressing, that's what it means to me.
I do think it's important to note the proximity that some of these posters have online with actual federal employees who self-identify as Zionists.
Yeah, and by federal employees, many of these people that we've heard over the years, like Glenn Elmers, who directly worked for the federal government, being used to kind of chaperone BAP lieutenants onto Stephen Hayward's Powerline podcast. And these people are in tight with the national conservative group. You have many speakers overlapping with these, anonymous internet right-wing figures that are now just running with the Zionist label as some kind of joke. But of course, this is getting tired. Guys, go back and look at the posts they made years ago. People are Control F or searching on Twitter terms like Zionist, Israel, Netanyahu, Likud, and they're finding that this has always been there, but it was always masked with some kind of implied irony. Alt-Zog is the joining of two familiar, well-acquainted interests, Gentile nihilism and Jewish chauvinism. Now, this is how alt-Zog masked itself. It was considered to be something like a Nietzschean or nihilist or black pill. Now, Book Cat, I see him, of course. It does explain perhaps a sensibility that we had toward Black Pill that it was just invidious. Book Cat would say despair is a sin. I constantly think about that. But it also does explain a kind of cover for Jewish chauvinism. And as we've learned very recently, Nietzschean thought and the kind of innovations of Nietzsche in the 1880s were the root for Zionist thinking, were the foundation for the greatest Zionist thinkers. They all have direct ties to Nietzsche's thought. And Zionism, as they were formulating it, is a cart that followed a Nietzschean horse. They were aware of Nietzsche's concepts of the Uberman. Herzl's idea of the new Jew was profoundly similar to that of Nietzsche's new European man. Herzl even stated in Der Judenstaat, which is kind of a founding text of what would become Zionist thought and the construction and creation of an Israeli state, if I wish to substitute a new building for an old one, I must demolish before I construct. This is directly from Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals. If a temple is to be erected, a temple must be destroyed. The link between nihilism and a type of Zionism is not just long-standing, it's perhaps generative and original. Now I'll go to the next highlight. I'm not going to cover a lot. I'm just covering a few of the points that he made here that I thought were interesting. And some of it I'm cherry picking. Similarly, there are those who choose anonymity because of the intense persecution of illiberal thought, although their motives for participating in such a discursive space are decidedly less noble. This subset of wrong thinkers is motivated by the lure of the taboo, and so their anonymity is less principled. This is very common across all dissident politics. You'll discover that there's really a very thin veneer of understanding that's basically just a mimesis. They understand the hot take or the position that we're all supposed to have on an issue, but they're actually here because it makes people mad. And this is pretty endemic among young people anyway. But in the case of Alt-Zog, anonymity is a mystifying fog, which disguises and hides away the individual's authentic self from the audience they seek to exploit. Now, there was a great interview between John Jack Murphy Goldman, who would later become a Claremont Fellow in 2021, and the president of the Claremont Institute, Ryan Williams. And Jack Murphy was extolling the virtues of Claremont bringing aboard Bronze Age Pervert and working with Bronze Age Pervert when they published a review of his book and then further a compendium of competing analyses. And Jack Murphy seemed to believe that Bronze Age Pervert, I think the quote was, he's really got the young guys. They really understand him. And the irony is that a lot of young people don't act young online, and only old people act young. So anonymity enables and provides the ability to do that. Obviously, if you're in your mid-40s and you're, as Bap would say, or, from the board culture space, it's going to wear out pretty quickly. And spaces have done a lot to expose that. Why would a person do this? Well, they might, if their motives once exposed, put them at odds with the audience they have successfully hoodwinked. Exposure of motive would likely lead to the exposure of their authentic self, which would also cast further doubt on the desirability, nay, the morality of their stated aims. What Alt-Zog offers is not an alternative to status quo politics, but an alternative path for the enjoyment of status quo politics through jouissance, through the thrill of transgression, through saying total breath, while, without understanding it, covertly supporting the Likud party. But this is a settlement. This is a centrism, and we're seeing that rise with Alt-Zog. Academic Agent and Sargon of Akkad are promoting sensible centrism. They're teaching you a way of settling for status quo politics, for settling for nothing but the conferred status of being able to communicate with a Claremont Institute person or something, to have Dave Raboy come on your podcast. But how can you enjoy that? How can you cope with that? Some people will say, well, we're infiltrating. You don't understand. I'm networking. By the time I'm 60, I'll be running the thing. That never ends up happening. But others will be presented with transgression. They'll be presented with Eichen has cheeseburger syntax. They don't understand that because their parents looked at the Eichen has cheeseburger cats and laughed. And so when a 45-year-old Romanian man uses that, it's seen as kind of funny or whatever, right? And you see other people mimicking that, and everyone just falls into this shared mimesis. They know it's transgressive, they know it's thrilling, but they don't really understand that, If it was really transgressive, how could I see it? So none of this is based on analysis or self-knowledge. And I hate to shit on Zoomers, but that's what attracts young people to this. And that's why we see an ironic, like lowercase I, ironic pro-Zionist youth movement, no matter how small, that's centered around the Amarna forums. That becomes jouissance. The dissident right is calcified to a degree over like the last 6 years. And now, to hold the positions that are authentically dissident because they are not reflected at all in status quo power can be peddled as something that's like boring, that everyone knows, and it's more fun to get a reaction out of people who will react to you. The establishment will never react to you. Paul Gottfried wrote about the Straussians, about the followers of Leo Strauss, and said, they never react to anyone to their right. They never even acknowledge you. We're used to this kind of ignorance of dissidents because some of the most exciting moments of the last year have been when like Kevin McCarthy has to say
leader of the movement's
name. That's exciting. That's new. But if you're down in the trenches with each other, it's easy to provoke a reaction. And so the best way to provoke a reaction from a groyper, the best thrill of jouissance that you could get, is to be ironically pro-Zionist.